Warhammer The Horus Heresy, Eidolon The Auric Hammer by Mark Collins. Chapter 6. Reflections. Eidolon did not spend much time within his chambers. The idea of rest had, at some point, become anathema to him, and the constant pain that had haunted him put paid to any fantasies of sleep. He maintained the chambers as an affection, the space amidst the constant madness of the ship where he could be alone and bask in that solitude. It was not enough to be a figure of awe upon the command throne. No, the true ruler maintained a distance between himself and his men. Even upon Terra it had been the same. His family had held fortified estates, protected by myriad defence systems and men-at-arms. Their retainers had fought and died for something greater than themselves, so some fragment of nobility could endure in that vastness which had once been a mountain. That had been the way of Europa. Survival at any cost. Dying was for others to do, for armies and slaves. The warlords who had fought unification and failed had done so because they thought they were the last vanguards of their way of life. In a way, they had been correct. Eidolon's family, the other pretender nobles of a dead world, had chosen a different path. Yet he realized now it had all been the same. Their children had passed beyond life and death so that they could live on. He, a second son, had been given to the fleshsmiths of the Emperor's new armies. Not to be one of the base thunder warriors who had smashed all resistance. Not a butcher of Gaudois. You will be an angel. A voice brushed his mind from out of memory, and he scowled at its emergence. Too many memories these nights, intruding in the manner of dreams and hallucination. A sign of weakness, if ever there was one. Perhaps when the warp's brazen excesses were banished they could cease. It was some lingering game of the Dark Prince, or of his father, some curse of the self-proclaimed shattered king. You will be an angel. Who had said those words to him so long ago? Not his father. His mother, perhaps? Some pitying sibling? Or one of the Emperor's agents themselves? He had been part of a golden tithe. The noble sons of Europa prostituted for the Emperor's ambitions, less than slaves, simply raw materials for what was to come, the iron that might one day be imperial steel. He had taken pride in that once, long ago, before Laren, before Istvan, the parade of beautiful horrors that had led them inexorably to this moment. Sons returning to murder their father, an empire on its knees. He wondered whether the Emperor had foreseen this end. Had he known, on some level, that you could not raise up a generation and turn them into weapons, into killers, into monsters, without them one day returning home to slake their appetites upon him? Where was your foresight then? This long game, played out at last. Fate's threads come to strangle you on your hubris. Eidolon looked up. Of all the things within his chambers, of all the trophies of war and instruments of violence, there was one thing that had not been utterly ruined by the gifts of the gods. On the wall above the space where a bed would have rested, a piece of art was mounted. It had been a rendition of Chemos from the hand of Kelland Roget, beautiful in its own way. Eidolon had savoured such things once. Mortal art had possessed an allure for him, though not in the way it had for others among his legion brothers. He did not truly wish to create it. To possess it was enough. To know that this thing, this object, was his. Ownership, the desire to rule, had always been in his blood, wedded to his soul. Perhaps that is why his time with the Death Lord had been so illuminating. They were cut from the same rough cloth. Commanders, rulers, conquerors. He let his eyes trace over the curdled landscape, finding new details. Eidolon had destroyed the peace many times since the Maraveglia had enlivened his soul. More times again since he had passed beyond life and death. Each time, whether he ended it by fire or by blade, the peace returned, unharmed and whole, yet changed. Sometimes a tower in the background would suddenly be made out of flesh and bone. Other times there would be crucified loyalists in the foreground, close enough that the details of their fidelity could still be made out. Aquillas nailed to their chests, turncloak or parasite carved into their skulls. Recently the painting had begun to reflect a broken and burned world, teeming with desperate defenders and wrathful invaders. Even that could be put right. When it was over, They all sat upon their thrones, and the material and immaterial were their subjects. Then there would be time for reckonings, and perhaps for rest. No rest for us. Not for 10,000 years of empty war. Only through me can you seize a future worth commanding. Eidolon blinked. He turned and looked upon one of the few remaining mirrors in his chambers, its glass yet intact. The shrunken horror he had become leered back at him, its eyes brighter somehow than they had been. The rheum and cataracts abated, leaving his sight clear. His mind was sharper, thoughts racing with all the surety of youth and vigour, as he had been once. He began to turn away and stopped. The reflection did not follow him. It stood and it watched, caged by glass and the gilt of the mirror. It leaned forward, its eyes burning now with the predator's lustre as it drove its taloned fingers into the barrier between them. The mirror shattered in its frame, bowing the wood and gold outwards. Slivers fell in a sudden sparkling rain, impacting the ground like bolt shots. Most stayed in place and began to move as the thing forced its way out and through, shards clinging to it, forming it, giving it life and solidity enough to lurch into the room. Eidolon reached up and seized its throat, driving it back, snarling as he hooked the fingers of his other hand into the thing's eye sockets. It screamed, with a voice of grinding glass, a silica death scream that grated against Eidolon's mind. Even as molten fluid poured from the wounds, it seared his fingers, hardening and shattering almost as soon as it was shed. He hurled it backwards, and it threw out its arms, bracing itself as though against the sucking force of an airlock. "You cannot escape me," it hissed. "We are destined for one another." Clawed hands closed around Eidolon's neck as it threw itself forward in one last desperate attack. Eidolon's hand snapped back as he drove his fists through the snarling visage. There was an explosion of fragments, wings of glass flaring up and around him. Blood stained his cheeks, hot and sudden. He flinched and saw simply the mirror, its surface now ruined as the gleaming plate lay broken into 1,000 pieces. He spun about, realizing he had been lost too long in fugue, that he was once again alone. A sudden vox click stole his attention. "Speak." "My lord," the voice crackled, "you are required upon the bridge. There is something here that you must see." Eidolon strode onto the bridge and watched the madness unfold. Everywhere there was motion. Serfs and slaves dashed around, compensating as the ships shuddered around them. Metal screamed, and the air sang with machine agony. The oculus was clouded with the warp, like a corpse's eye, and cracks had formed at the corners of it, where the relentless pressure of the Empyrean had crowded in, pushing at it through the bubble of tenuously stable reality maintained by the Geller field. He smiled at that. Even the great ship could suffer and bleed. It was as so many things were, yet mortal. "Why have I been summoned?" he asked, almost bored now. The slaves bowed low, their eyes at his boots. Only the boldest of them, those still in uniform and who still held their minds, raised their hands to point beyond the fading fire in the oculus. Out there in the darkness, there was a world. It hovered in the infinite black, turning orb of green seas and verdant land, a marble of contrasting beauty. His eyes caught the swathes of white stone, visible even from orbit, that sprawled across its continents. Lights glimmered at the edges of the world. When night had already taken hold, starlight illuminated the great expanses of the cities, beautiful in their construction. His tongue lapped at his lips. He knew this place. Fate, circumstance, the whim and whimsy of the gods had returned him to this moment. He sighed bitterly now. He remembered. And in that memory there was another voice, lapping at his mind, laughing in the chambers of his soul, mirroring his words with dark delight. Tatragala. There are other names, of course. Other worlds and other wars. Legions, even diminished legions, collect accolades and stories. They collect locations. Place becomes synonymous with act. All the battles of the glorious and resurgent Third, and they are many now. We might think of Proxima. We lionize them there, where they earned the Palatine. Others might speak of the extinction of the Katara. There is a beautiful tragedy there, and were I a singer, I might commit it whole to verse, of the champions in their tumult, of the fall to distant grief. I am not a singer, nor a poet. I will not speak of the myriad dead, in honour or treachery. I shall not speak of the hubris of Byzus, nor any of the other 100 compliances. Instead, I remembered Tatricala, where I watched a world kneel and a master of men rise. Amidst the Fire, a memoir of the Great Crusade. Unreleased manuscript of Christian Partinus, Remembrancer. End, Act 1. So, that was interesting. I'm not sure if Eidolon is actually haunted by that demon, the Shattered King. I think he is. I think we're definitely going to see more of the Shattered King in the future. I don't think he's free. But the question is he just a little bit mad? Is he losing his mind? Or is he simply possessed? Or is this another part of himself that he's seeing? I'm not sure. I feel like he's definitely not done with the Shattered King. I don't think we're going to see much Fulgrim in this book, if at all. Because I feel like having the... This isn't a Primarch book. And I feel like having a Primarch in it would kind of undermine the titular character, because when you have the Primarch around, no one else is ever going to be nearly as important or as impactful. It's like when Marnius Calgar comes in at the end of Space Marine 2, and you kind of realize that, yeah, you're not actually the main character, despite Lieutenant Titus being an incredibly important character and the protagonist throughout the whole story. It's kind of crazy. But I think that says more about power levels and impact of... I guess that's Hero Hammer, as it were, at play. But I think it's interesting. I don't know anything about Tatricala, the planet. Has it popped up in the Horus Heresy before? It seems important. I don't know if it's popped up in previous books. As you know, this is my very first entry in the Horus Heresy series. So it'd be interesting if it had. I wonder if there's any required reading for this book. I don't feel like there is so far. I do feel you have to have a vague understanding of who the Third Legion are in the Warhammer setting. As long as you know what Warhammer The Horus Heresy is about and who the Emperor's children are, in general, you can kind of get a vague sense of it. So I think Mark Collins, in Act 1 at least, Mark Collins has done a pretty decent job in, you know, introducing us to the central character and the world in which he lives. We are nearing the halfway point coming up to Act 2. I don't know how many acts there are in this book, but I suppose we'll find out. I feel like there's going to be 3 acts, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, I hope that you're enjoying this book. I'm really enjoying it. It's a gorgeous special edition I've got here. I've heard the standard edition has some issues with some of the print on the exterior of it, where bits of the writing fades. But this is a fantastic book. Really enjoying it. I hope you are too. I hope you'll continue to join me on this journey and continue to have a good time. Do subscribe, do like, do share. I hope that, you know, keep enjoying this story. I'll see you next time. Mwah.